Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day. For the tutorial today, we're going to work on a halo drop design. Now these can be used as pendants or earrings or really fancy large charms, or you could even make a necklace featuring multiple halo drop charms for something that's really spectacular. Let's head down to the board, take a look at the project, and then we'll make a couple of examples. So the first example that we'll work on today is the basic halo drop with this lovely coiled and spiraled wire. I'm going to be using some 6mm beads, which are round shiny obsidian. I also have some examples made with ultra large, these are 10mm sunstones. And then an obsidian with an overlaid halo design featuring some garnet. So we'll start off with the plain version and then I'll show you how to add that little extra if you wanted to just take it up to another level. Today we're going to be working with 1mm 18 gauge wire, and if you add the little extra halo of those beautiful small garnet beads, you can also use either 0.4 26 gauge or 0.5 24 gauge wire to add them on, but the main wire is going to be 18 gauge or 1mm. Now you can use your multi-step bail makers, you can use your memory wire finishing pliers, but today I'm going to be using a 1.5mm stainless steel pin. Now this comes from one of my kits which I sell so that you can create multiple layers of weaving. So this is a pendant that I made with Fleur at Relax and Craft earlier on last year, and you can buy these pins on my New Monday store, and I'll drop a link into the description if you want to grab hold of them. They're really helpful for all kinds of weaving, not just for doing fancy spike weave or any of the other Helios weaves that you might enjoy. To begin with, I have a 12-inch length of that 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and I'm just going to smooth and warm through the first part. I'm going to allow around about 2.5 inches over the surface of my pin, and then I'm going to wrap a good 5 times around that pin. Now you are able to do this on your bail makers if you prefer, so let's leave a good 1.5 to 2 inch length just on one end there. And as you can see, I've just got 3 wraps so far. I'm just going to flip this over to make it easier to handle for me, being a right-hander. And that is now 5 wraps. Now if that goes a little bit loose or squiffy, you can tighten that up just by pulling those opposite sides of your pliers together at opposite diagonal ends of that coil. So we want to keep this quite close to the end, but don't worry if it falls off at all. So you can now use the other side of your memory wire pliers. You could use your bail making pliers, or you could use a small wooden dowel. It depends on the size of the bead that you're going to be using later on. So I'm going to be using some 6mm beads. So the smallest of my beadalon mandrels, which is a 1/4 inch or 6.3mm, will be adequate. And what I'm going to do is just run the wire through thumb and forefinger to get that nice and fluid. Now hopefully you can see that that 1mm or 18 gauge wire is coming off from underneath that steel pin. So I'm going to make that nice and smooth, pop the mandrel into position, draw the wire around the mandrel so that it goes over the top of the steel pin. So we're looking to make that little U shape. And you could, if you don't have a mandrel set, you could use a different set of bail making pliers, or you could use your memory wire finishing pliers. So let's make that a bit smaller and use the pin on my memory wire finishing pliers. These are an absolute boon to have around the workshop. So let's just drop that down into the focal range slightly. So that 1mm wire has travelled 5 times around the pin. It comes away from underneath the pin, around my pliers. And I'm then going to wrap 5 times again with that wire coming over the top of that steel pin. So it travels from underneath to over the top. I will drop that back down into the focal zone in just a moment. Let's just wrangle that wire so we have 5 wraps. Now you can see that that has gone baggy, but it's very easy to just pinch that up. Let's just draw it away from the second tine of those pliers and just compress that spiral neatly. So once you've got that set, we can switch out to the other side. And what we're going to do is now create another half circle, utilising whichever round form we have chosen to work with. So again, I'm going to use those memory wire finishing pliers. Now this time, that 1mm wire is on top of the steel pin. So I'm going to draw it all the way around that tine on the memory wire finishing pliers to get a nice semicircular form. Pull that firmly into position, and then I'm going to wrap 5 times on the other side. So I'm going to leave it on my memory wire finishing pliers, or my round form of choice, until I have those 5 wraps. So that's 3, that's 4, obviously got to hit the camera, and then that is 5. So let's just push that away for now. And you can see we have a residue of wire available to us. Again, I'm just going to make sure that I tighten up those spirals so that we have the right number of turns. Pull the memory wire finishing pliers or the round form out of the way. And what we're looking for is 2 semicircles of wire separated by 5 rotations around that steel rod. And what I'm going to do now is just check that I do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, there are 5 there. And I'm going to trim away my 1mm wire so that I have 2 lengths on either end, exactly the same size. Getting it done looked fiddly. It really isn't. The only reason it looks fiddly is because I've got a camera quite close to the desk trying to show you the fine detail of the tutorial. Give it a go. You can alternate between which round form you use to make sure that you get a nice semicircle that you know is going to skirt around the edge of your beads. We'll move on to the next stage now, and we'll create ourselves that halo drop. I'm just going to make sure that each of those coils are nice and neat and tidy. You can flip that over and just diagonally squish each of those little coils to make that super neat and tidy. Now in a moment we'll be turning these ends into coils, so it does pay to make sure that they are the same length. In that way you'll get the same size coil. Now I really like having coils on my jewellery, but if you don't want to have those on there, then you can absolutely, when you've decided on the next stage of the tutorial, take the tail to the rear of that design and just trim it away. Now removing the wire from the pin should be relatively simple. You don't have to lubricate it. These are really helpful to have though. So we now have this little squishy bit of spring stuff. So let's turn it into something else. Let me grab the correct piece of wire. This again is 1mm or 18 gauge. I'm working with silver on copper today. It's a nice effect, nice and bright and spring-like. And there's around about 12 inches just here. So what I'm going to do is to make sure that I have trimmed away a flush end. And then I'm going to grab my round pliers, you could use your memory wire finishing pliers, and just create a spiral form. Now for this one, it's the base of the, in this instance, pendant, but it could equally be the bottom of your earring or whatever you plan on using this design technique for. So what I'm going to do is go for just 2 rotations from that start point of the spiral, and I'll give that a really hearty squish because I want this to be quite strong. So once I've squished that into position, I'm going to grab hold of the tail of wire and pull that away at 90 degrees. Now this first inch or so of wire should be nice and straight, and you can very gently hammer it or work hard on it if you wish. It will just make your life slightly easier throughout the next couple of stages of the design. So what we're going to do is pop that down to one side, and we'll make some coils if you plan on making coils. If not, you can just trim these to around about 1/2 inch, and then you can decide where you want them to finish off later. So grabbing in those round nose pliers again, I'm just going to rotate around with those pliers to begin with, and then turn that into a coil. Now they don't have to sit in their final position just right now, and you can leave this to do it later on if you prefer. However, it's going to get on my nerves if they sit there. So I'm just going to make that into a coil and sit that just close to the little spring section that we made. I might leave the one at the top to finish off later. So what we're going to do is find the non-coiled end of our next piece of wire. And I'm just going to put the base, the one where I've put that little coil on, and I'm going to tuck the end of my wire up through until we get into the gap created by the round form. So I'm just going to push that through and ignore the second two springy bits. I'm then going to grab in one of my beads. I'm working with a 6mm round obsidian, which fits on my core wire. I'm then just going to draw that back into position and get it to sit inside that gap, retract the wire, which has got the coil on the end, until I can then fit it up inside the next of those little springy forms that I made on the steel rod that we were working with earlier. So that's through the second little springy section. So if I push that all the way through, ignoring the third little springy section, going to add in a second bead. Again, it's a round bead and it's 6mm. So let's push that down into position, and then we'll retract the end of that wire and then push that up inside the third little springy thing. So let's draw that all the way down to the base of the design. So you can see already that we've haloed those beads, and we've made that really, really nice and neat and tidy. So one of the reasons that I tend to make a spiral in this design is because it gives me the opportunity to decide whether I want this to be a spinning drop, a spinning halo drop, it could be pendant, earring, charm, whatever, or whether I want it to be static. So if I want it to be static, what it means is I can press the upper spiral against the lower spiral and it will stop it from moving around. So for now, what we want to do is to create the bail or the joining section up at the top. So right now, this is all still quite fluid. I think I'm going to make this one into a pendant, so I want a slightly larger bail. If I just grab one of my example pieces, this has got quite a small loop up at the top. It will fit on most fine chains, but not great on chunky chains. The one that I've added some haloing to, I made with a large round form up at the top, and that will fit on pretty much any threading material I choose to use. So I'm going to bring the wire forwards up at the top of the design, and it's going to be up and away from the spiral down at the bottom. So the base spiral is flat, it's in the same orientation as the desk, and I'm going to bring that tail of wire up at the top forwards so that I know that my threading material will be able to sit through there. So let's grab some bail makers or some memory wire finishing pliers to create a round form. Again, at the moment it's all still quite mobile. So let's pop that in and see if that's going to be big enough a bail. I don't think it will be, so I might grab my bail makers. Let's just smooth that around. There's a massive tail of wire there. I have far more than I actually need, but that just means I can choose to mess around with the design as I go. So let's just open that back out, and I think we'll go for number 4 on the bail making pliers, and that should be a good size. That looks pretty decent to get most chains through. So what we're going to do is a classic wrapped loop. You've seen this 1,000 times, I'm sure. So just grab across that rounded form. I'm giving that a little bit of work hardening, and I'm just going to fill in the space between the top of the uppermost spring on that mobile section and where the wires cross over, but I'm not crushing down where the wires actually cross. So let's take that all the way around. I think I've got 4 turns in there. So I'm going to be covering this with the spiral, so I'm not particularly worried about where that ends. Do make sure you cut the correct piece of wire away though. It's kind of annoying if you cut the wrong tail. Albeit, if you've got 1 tail out of 2 in this position, you could just use that second one for a spiral anyway. So if things go slightly awry, you do have options. So what I'm going to do is just try and get this spiral that is on the springy part, not the piece on the main core, and I'm just going to bring that into the very centre, and what I want to do is to push it down against the spiral at the base of that core wire, because that will lock the 2 pieces together. It's not going to spin anymore now. So that is set in position. If you wanted this to be more mobile, you can either go for a shorter spiral, you can go for no spiral at all, just cut it away at the rear of the design and then the whole thing will spin. What I'd like to do is exactly the same thing as I did here, is I'll make a spiral and then I will push it upwards towards that wrapped loop up at the top. So I'm not going to make you watch me do that again. I'll be back with you in a second. So I've created the spiral at the top of that springy section in exactly the same way as I did at the bottom. And now all I want to do is grab across that flat spiral and just push it back towards the bail. And that means that you now have a pendant or a drop that won't spin around. Those spirals kind of keep it in position. So you could just run with this exactly as it is right now. But if you want to add some further detail, watch this space. So if you do choose to make these as earrings, you will need to ensure that they look fairly similar. They're actually quite cute as earrings. You don't have to have the spirals. I know that a lot of my jewellery has spirals in it, but they are quite functional. However, if you want to add some extra detail to this design and wear it as a pendant or something a little bit more fancy, then follow me down to the board and we will make one together. I have now some 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire, and the length is around about 12 inches. What we're going to do is wind on 3 times around one of these halo sections. I'm going to start up at the top of the pendant. So it's just a case of posting a little bit through. Go for about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch to give you an opportunity to just get that wound on. Now, because we're working with quite small pieces of wire here, I'm just going to use my pliers to help me. You can obviously start with a little bit more wire, and then you'll be able to just pull that through. If you're working with precious metals, it does pay to understand how to just use every last little bit though. So let's just wind this wire through and get that smooth against the core of that little swoop or that little halo. So once that is settled down neatly against the first section of the halo, make sure that that's nice and tight. You've got a nice little coil and that there are no sticky out bits. We're going to push that up as far as we can towards the top of that design. Let's get that into the best possible light, and I'm going to now add in my supplementary haloing bead. These are 2.5mm round garnets. So the issue with this is that I can't see where the hole is, so please bear with. Slide that all the way down until it hits the outside of that wire halo. Push that up against the core wire, the little spiral or spring that we made. Now my finer gauge wire is coming over the top of that little halo, so pinch the bead into position, take the tail wire and post it up from underneath. Make sure that you get some nice tension in that and bring that through. So all I'm going to be doing is repeating that exact same thing. I'm going to put 3 wraps between each bead, so that's 1. It will be mobile to start with, that's 2. Scooch it back into position. And then here is the 3rd wrap coming up through that halo. Again, push that back up to the top, and then I'm going to add as many beads as I can fathom. On my sample piece, I managed to get 5 on either side. Do try and keep it balanced, the same number on each of those loops or those little halo sections. Another thing that you can do to change up how this looks slightly is to just sort of alter how many times you're adding. So you could go for 3 beads in drops, which means that you would need to use your round form 3 times. So I'm just going to continue with this one, and I'll meet you when I get down to here. I have 5 beads set on that first halo, and I have wrapped 3 times around the last little section of that halo before we meet that central spring. So what I'm going to do is to over wrap that central spring with the continuation of my 0.4mm gauge wire. So I'm just filling in those little springy bits, like so, and then we're going to continue on exactly the same technique with that second halo. So I'm going to begin by wrapping around 3 times at the top of that halo, and then I will add my first gemstone bead into position. And again, these are 2.5mm round garnet beads, so make sure that your coils are nice and tight, and this will start bringing everything a little bit more stably together. So it is exactly the same technique for the lower halo as it was for the upper halo. Pop your bead into position, allow it to sit right up against that halo, pinch it into position, and then because my fine wire is underneath that halo, it needs to come through the bead and then go over the top. So we're always switching from one side of the halo wire to the other. So we're creating our own little extra additional halo to this design. And again, I will wrap 3 times between each bead. So I'll join you again when I get down here to the base of the design. I finished adding my second little halo of garnets around that halo wire, and what we're going to do is continue to wrap the fine wire into the grooves on the spring that we created earlier until such time as we can lift up and reveal that little spiral down at the bottom, and we're going to finish off by just twirling twice around that little spiral. Once you're happy with those 2 little wraps, just to make sure everything is nice and tight, we're going to cut away that last tiny tail of wire and then just pinch that down against the halo to make sure that it doesn't stick up. Once you're happy that that is all back into position, what we're going to do, make sure that that bail wire is in the right place and then push that lowest pair of spirals back together. I hope that you have enjoyed the halo drop design. It's one of the first things I taught myself to make about 12 years ago with wire. So have a beautiful day, and I look forward to seeing you back again very soon. Bye for now.